No, that's all you get.
That's all you get.
I can't go to Sunday school. Thanks for waiting me, though. They want me to stay here. Will you pray with me? Gracious God, we give you thanks for the gift of your word, for the blessing of coming together to learn from your word. Now be with us, guide us, help us, and protect us, O God, that the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts together will be acceptable in your sight. For you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So when I read Matthew's account of the wise men, which, by the way, I shouldn't even have to qualify that because it is the only account of the wise men, I'm intrigued frequently by this one line. It happened at about the 5th verse of the text which Bob read. Herod was very afraid, and all Jerusalem with him. What do you think you know about Herod? I know it's a new year, but I just asked you a question, which means I'm waiting. What do you think you know about Herod? What stories do you know about this particular king? Anything. Just fire them off at me.
Great architect.
Great architect, okay. I didn't know that about Herod. That wasn't in my preparation, so good for you.
We had John the Baptist beheaded. Was that it?
Maybe. Yeah, it's not 100% clear which king, but okay. Knocks the head off of John the Baptist. I'm going to give you that one. What else?
He was Jewish ruler.
He was a Jewish ruler. Good. Did anybody else die at Herod's hand that you remember in the Bible stories? All the babies. So, when we think of Herod, do we think warm, fuzzy, nice guy kind of thoughts? No. And I raised to you the question I raised again with the children, and that is, why would the wise men stop at Herod? Wouldn't it have been a much neater, cleaner, easier story if the wise men had just followed the star and skipped the palace altogether? In order to answer this question, you have to ask yourself, first you have to be willing to go, yeah, why did they stop there? And the easy answer and most logical answer is, if a new king is born, where would you expect that king to live? In the palace. It's called succession, right? You know, the king gives birth to, or the king's spouse or concubine or whomever gives birth to the son, and we have that line of succession. So it would be logical that if there is a new king of Israel, you go to the capital, you find the king, you say, hey, where's your new kid? And Herod says, what you talking about, Willis? Most of you, some of you over here are too young to understand that one. And then goes on to be deeply and justifiably concerned as he listens to the story. One could reinterpret the story in this way. Someone shows up in Washington, D.C. and says, I'm going to be the new president. And the president says, what you talking about, Willis? And then we have this weird phrase, and all Jerusalem, but since we've reinterpreted, and all of Washington, D.C. was concerned with him. Now, you know a little bit about American politics, I suspect. There's been a little news coverage lately. Oh, come on, that was funny. Would all of Washington, D.C. be concerned with him? No. highly divided community. And it is fair to say that all of Jerusalem was not truly concerned with Herod either. But I promise you, everyone in favor in the king's palace who heard there was going to be a new king and it wasn't coming from the line of Herod was going, uh-oh, there goes my meal ticket. I got to figure out where this next thing is. Now, this is where I pause and tell you the other working title of this sermon was, I Just Can't Wait to Be King. But I didn't think you wanted me to break out into the whole Simba song thing, so I decided to go with All Jerusalem with it. Because as I was imagining and reimagining, how do we tell this story? How do we give this story new meaning? How do we give this story fresh legs? I found myself wrestling with the notion that we don't know it, but there might have been a little baby Herod hanging around. The Bible doesn't tell us, but it is a reasonable assumption that there's a successor. Now, we do know that Herod is succeeded by Herod Antipas, and probably is, in fact, a linear succession. So here is little Herod Antipas singing, I just can't wait to be king, and the wise men come in and say, you need to stop singing, because there's going to be a new sheriff in town. And all the palace goes, ooh. There goes our way of life as we know it. And thus, we have the quest that follows. We have Herod trying to destroy this threat, not only to his kingdom, but to his son's kingdom. This happens to us, church. When something happens in life that shakes or threatens our expectations, we do everything we can to smash it like a bug, don't we? Unless you're one of my children who will remain nameless, in which case you run to Dad and say, please go smash the bug. But I'm not telling you which one. And so we need to wrestle. We need to wrestle a little longer with why would God send the wise men through Herod? Yeah, it was a logical, historical conclusion, but we're talking about God here, and that could have been bypassed. Excuse me. But I think this story is necessary. I think this story is necessary because it becomes the pattern of breaking all of the paradigms of that Jewish religious state that we were dealing with, where the monarchy and the temple were hand in hand. It becomes the paradigm by which Jesus breaks down the existing ruling class as well as the existing church ruling class. Today, God is still breaking down ruling paradigms in our lives. I didn't know this was becoming an illustration for the sermon until last night because I didn't know I was going to do this. But you may have noticed the chairs are different than they were even 3 weeks ago. And they were definitely different than they were on Christmas Eve because we rearranged the furniture for that. And some of you, it's been fun watching you. Because some of you are like, I miss my table. Where am I going to put my coffee? I miss having that person right there near me that I can have a dialogue with. And others of you are like, oh, I just love having the rose again. It's wonderful. It looks like I was used to. Because we fight our paradigms and our expectations. That's part of the human condition. I was literally going to put the tables back up yesterday, but I was just too tired. So I thought, hey, this might become sort of an illustration. Let's see what happens. And you played exactly like I anticipated you would. And so we worried, and all Jerusalem with us. No matter which side you're on, whether you want your table back or you like your rows, in your mind, everyone surely agrees. Is Alan here today? I'm sorry. Is Alan Chandler here today? Yesterday, he said something about, I really like the rows. I said, Alan, what do you think the odds are they're staying? He said, you're going to do what you want to do. And I went, you're learning well, Padawan. But I'm not sure what's going to happen next week yet. All Jerusalem hasn't spoken, but I, like Herod, am not all that benevolent a dictator. So here's what I do know. In our lives, when things change, our expectations are challenged, like Herod and all Jerusalem. We have to make a choice. Am I willing to say, God, what are you doing here? And how can I get on board with it? Or am I going to fight it with all I've got? Spoiler alert, Herod didn't win. In case you haven't read the next part of that story. It's a new year, and some of you have even probably made New Year resolutions. Some of you are pessimistic about whether or not you will keep said resolutions, and there's good historic precedent for that. But some of you are bound and determined, and there's good historic precedent for that too. But here's what I want to challenge you with, and I promise the last thing I'm going to challenge you with today. When those opportunities for a different way come, I challenge you again to ask yourself, what's God doing in this? Why is God challenging me in this way? And then the hard question, is my resolve of God or of my own resistance? The only thing I can tell you for sure is all of Jerusalem is probably not with you. May God help you as you make choices in this new year.